Palmyra is an ancient Semitic city in present-day Homs Governorate, Syria. Archaeological finds date back to the Neolithic period, and the city was first documented in the early 2nd millennium BC. Palmyra changed hands on a number of occasions between different empires before becoming a subject of the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. The city grew wealthy from trade caravans. The Palmyra were renowned merchants who established colonies along the Silk Road and operated throughout the Roman Empire. Palmyra's wealth enabled the construction of monumental projects, such as the Great Colonnade, the Temple of Bel, and the distinctive tower tombs. The Palmyrenes were a mix of Amorites, Arameans, and Arabs. The city's social structure was tribal, and its inhabitants spoke Palmyrene. Greek was used for commercial and diplomatic purposes. The culture of Palmyra was influenced by Greco-Roman culture and produced distinctive art and architecture that combined Eastern and Western traditions. The city's inhabitants worshipped local deities and Mesopotamian and Arab gods. By the 3rd century AD, Palmyra was a prosperous regional center reaching the apex of its power in the 260s, when Palmyrene king Odaenathus defeated Persian Emperor Shapur I. The king was succeeded by regent Queen Zenobia, who rebelled against Rome and established the Palmyrene Empire. In 273, Roman Emperor Aurelian destroyed the city, which was later restored by Diocletian at a reduced size. The Palmyrenes converted to Christianity during the 4th century and to Islam in the second half of the 1st millennium, after which the Palmyrene and Greek languages were replaced by Arabic. Before 273 AD, Palmyra enjoyed autonomy and was attached to the Roman province of Syria, having its political organization influenced by the Greek city-state model during the first 2 centuries AD. The city became a Roman colonia during the 3rd century, leading to the incorporation of Roman governing institutions, before becoming a monarchy in 260. Following its destruction in 273, Palmyra became a minor center under the Byzantines and later empires. Its destruction by the Timurids in 1400 reduced it to a small village. Under French mandatory rule in 1932, the inhabitants were moved into the new village of Tadmor, and the ancient site became available for excavations. In 2015, Palmyra came under the control of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, which later destroyed a number of the site's buildings. The city was retaken by the Syrian army on the 27th of March 2016. Etymology. The earliest attested native name of the city was the Semitic language term Tadma, which first appeared in the early 2nd millennium BC. The word's etymology is vague. The philologist Albert Schultens argued that it derived from the Semitic word for dates, thus referring to the palm trees that surrounded the city. The name Palmyra appeared during the early 1st century AD in the works of Pliny the Elder, and was used throughout the Greco-Roman world. It is generally believed that Palmyra derives from Tadma, and 2 possibilities have been presented by linguists. One view holds that Palmyra was an alteration of Tadma. According to Schultens, the Romans altered the name from Tadma to Talmura and afterward to Palmyra in reference to the city's palm trees. Then the name reached its final form, Palmyra. Other philologists, such as John Starkey, consider Palmyra to be a translation of Tadma, which had derived from the Greek word for palm, palami. The linguist Michael Patrick O'Connor suggested that the names Palmyra and Tadma originated in the Hurrian language. As evidence, he cited the inexplicability of alterations to the theorized roots of both names. According to this theory, Tadma derives from the Hurrian word tad with the addition of the typical Hurrian mid-vowel rising formant ma. Similarly, according to this theory, Palmyra derives from the Hurrian word pal, using the same MVR format. Location and city layout. Palmyra is 215 kilometers northeast of the Syrian capital, Damascus, in an oasis surrounded by palms. Two mountain ranges overlook the city, the northern Palmyrene mountain belt from the north and the southern Palmyrene mountains from the southwest. In the south and the east, Palmyra is exposed to the Syrian desert. A small wadi crosses the area, flowing from the western hills past the city before disappearing in the eastern gardens of the oasis. South of the wadi is a spring, EFQA. Pliny the Elder described the town in the 70s AD as famous for its desert location, the richness of its soil, and the springs surrounding it, which made agriculture and herding possible. Layout. Palmyra began as a small settlement near the EFQA spring on the southern bank of Wadi al-Kabir. The settlement, known as the Hellenistic settlement, had residences expanding to the wadi's northern bank during the 1st century. Although the city's walls originally enclosed an extensive area on both banks of the wadi, the walls rebuilt during Diocletian's reign surrounded only the northern bank section. Most of the city's monumental projects were built on the wadi's northern bank. Among them is the Temple of Bel on a tel, which was the site of an earlier temple. However, excavation supports the theory that the tel was originally located on the southern bank, and the wadi was diverted south of the tel to incorporate the temple into Palmyra's late 1st and early 2nd century urban organization on the north bank. Also north of the wadi was the Great Colonnade, Palmyra's 1.1-kilometre long main street, which extended from the Temple of Bel in the east, to the funerary temple No. 86 in the city's western part. It had a monumental arch in its eastern section, and a tetrapylon stands in the center. The Baths of Diocletian, built on the ruins of an earlier building which might have been the royal palace, were on the left side of the colonnade. Nearby were the Temple of Baal-Shaman, residences, and the Byzantine churches, which include a 1,500-year-old church. The church columns were estimated to be 6 meters tall, and its base measured 12 by 24 meters. A small amphitheater was found in the church's courtyard. The Temple of Nabu and the Roman theatre were built on the colonnade's southern side. Behind the theatre were a small Senate building and the large agora, with the remains of a triclinium and a tariff court. A cross street at the western end of the colonnade leads to the camp of Diocletian, built by Sosianus Hierocles. Nearby are the Temple of Al-Lat and the Damascus Gate. People, language and society. At its height during the reign of Zenobia, Palmyra had more than 200,000 residents. Its earliest known inhabitants were the Amorites in the early 2nd millennium BC, and by the end of the millennium Aramaeans were mentioned as inhabiting the area. Arabs arrived in the city in the late 1st millennium BC. The soldiers of the Palmyrene Sheikh Zabdabel, who aided the Seleucids in the Battle of Raphia, were described as Arabs. The Arab newcomers were assimilated by the earlier inhabitants, used Palmyrene as a mother tongue, and formed a significant segment of the aristocracy. The city also had a Jewish community. Inscriptions in Palmyrene from the necropolis of Beit Shearim in Lower Galilee confirm the burial of Palmyrene Jews. Until the late 3rd century AD, Palmyrenes spoke a dialect of Aramaic and used the Palmyrene alphabet. The use of Latin was minimal, but Greek was used by wealthier members of society for commercial and diplomatic purposes, and it became the dominant language during the Byzantine era. After the Arab conquest, Greek was replaced by Arabic, from which a Palmyrene dialect evolved. Palmyra's society was a mixture of the different peoples inhabiting the city, which is seen in Aramaic, Arabic and Amorite clan names. Palmyra was a tribal community, but due to the lack of sources and understanding of the nature of Palmyrene tribal structure is not possible. 30 clans have been documented, 5 of which were identified as tribes, comprising several subclans. By the time of Nero, Palmyra had 4 tribes, each residing in an area of the city bearing its name. 3 of the tribes were the Khmer, Matabele and Marzan. The 4th tribe is uncertain, but was probably the Meta. In time, the 4 tribes became highly civic and tribal lines blurred. By the 2nd century, clan identity lost its importance, and it disappeared during the 3rd century. During the Umayyad period, Palmyra was mainly inhabited by the Kalb tribe. Benjamin of Tudela recorded the existence of 2,000 Jews in the city during the 12th century. Palmyra declined after its destruction by Timur in 1400, and was a village of 6,000 inhabitants at the beginning of the 20th century. Although surrounded by Bedouin, the villages preserved the dialect. Palmyra maintained the life of a small settlement until its relocation in 1932. Culture. Palmyra had a distinctive culture, based on a local Semitic tradition, and influenced by Greece and Rome. To appear better integrated into the Roman Empire, some Palmyrenes adopted Greco-Roman names, either alone or in addition to a second native name. The extent of Greek influence on Palmyra's culture is debated. Scholars interpreted the Palmyrenes' Greek practices differently. Many see those characters as a superficial layer over a local excellence. Palmyra's Senate was an example, although Palmyrene texts written in Greek described it as etbul. The Senate was a gathering of non-elected tribal elders. Others view Palmyra's culture as a fusion of local and Greco-Roman traditions. The culture of Persia influenced Palmyrene military tactics, dress and court ceremonies. Palmyra had no large libraries or publishing facilities, and it lacked an intellectual movement characteristic of other eastern cities such as Edessa or Antioch. Although Zenobia opened her court to academics, the only notable scholar documented was Cassius Longinus. Palmyra had a large agora. However, unlike the Greek agras, Palmyra's agora resembled an eastern caravanserai more than a hub of public life. The Palmyrenes buried their dead in elaborate family mausoleums, most with interior walls forming rows of burial chambers in which the dead, laying at full length, were placed. A relief of the person interred formed part of the wall's decoration, acting as a headstone. Sarcophagi appeared in the late 2nd century and were used in some of the tombs. Many burial monuments contained fully dressed, bejeweled mummies, embalmed in a method similar to that used in ancient Egypt. Art and architecture. Although Palmyrene art was related to that of Greece, it had a distinctive style unique to the Middle Euphrates region. Palmyrene art is well represented by the bust reliefs which seal the openings of its burial chambers. The reliefs emphasized clothing, jewelry and a frontal representation of the person depicted, characteristics which can be seen as a forerunner of Byzantine art. According to Michael Rostovtsev, Palmyra's art was influenced by Parthian art. However, the origin of frontality that characterized Palmyrene and Parthian arts is a controversial issue. While Parthian origin has been suggested, Michael Aviona contends that it was a local Syrian tradition that influenced Parthian art. Little painting, and none of the bronze statues of prominent citizens, have survived. A damaged frieze and other sculptures from the Temple of Bel, many removed to museums in Syria and abroad, suggest the city's public monumental sculpture. Many surviving funerary busts reached Western museums during the 19th century. Palmyra provided the most convenient Eastern examples, bolstering an art history controversy at the turn of the 20th century. To what extent Eastern influence on Roman art replaced idealized classicism with frontal, hieratic and simplified figures. This transition is seen as a response to cultural changes in the Western Roman Empire, rather than artistic influence from the East. Palmyrene bust reliefs, unlike Roman sculptures, are rudimentary portraits. Although many reflect high-quality individuality, the majority vary little across figures of similar age and gender. Like its art, Palmyra's architecture was influenced by the Greco-Roman style, while preserving local elements. Enclosed by a massive wall flanked with traditional Roman columns, Bel's sanctuary plan was primarily Semitic. Similar to the Second Temple, the sanctuary consisted of a large courtyard with the deity's main shrine off-center against its entrance site. Cemeteries west of the ancient walls, the Palmyrenes built a number of large-scale funerary monuments which now form the Valley of Tombs, a 1-kilometer-long necropolis. The more than 50 monuments were primarily tower-shaped and up to 4 stories high. Towers were replaced by funerary temples in the first half of the 2nd century AD, as the most recent tower is dated to 128 AD. The city had other cemeteries in the north, southwest, and southeast, where the tombs are primarily hypogea. Notable structures. Public buildings. The Senate building is largely ruined. It is a small building that consists of a peristyle courtyard and a chamber that has an apse at one end and rows of seats around it. Much of the baths of Diocletian are ruined and do not survive above the level of the foundations. The complex's entrance is marked by 4 massive Egyptian granite columns, each 1.3 meters in diameter, 12.5 meters high, and weigh 20 tons. Inside, the outline of a bathing pool surrounded by a colonnade of Corinthian columns is still visible, in addition to an octagonal room that served as a dressing room containing a drain in its center. The Agora of Palmyra is part of a complex that also includes the Tariff Court and the Triclinium, built in the second half of the 1st century AD. The Agora is a massive 71 by 84 meters structure with 11 entrances. Inside the Agora, 200 columnar bases that used to hold statues of prominent citizens were found. The inscriptions on the bases allowed an understanding of the order by which the statues were grouped. The eastern side was reserved for senators, the northern side for Palmyrene officials, the western side for soldiers, and the southern side for caravan chiefs. The Tariff Court is a large rectangular enclosure south of the Agora and sharing its northern wall with it. Originally, the entrance of the court was a massive vestibule in its southwestern wall. However, the entrance was blocked by the construction of a defensive wall and the court was entered through 3 doors from the Agora. The court gained its name by containing a 5 meters long stone slab that had the Palmyrene tax law inscribed on it. The triclinium of the Agora is located to the northwestern corner of the Agora and can host up to 40 persons. It is a small 12 by 15 meters hall decorated with Greek key motifs that run in a continuous line halfway up the wall. The building was probably used by the rulers of the city. Henry Arnold Sayrig proposed that it was a small temple before being turned into a triclinium, a banqueting hall. Temples. The Temple of Bel was dedicated in 32 AD. It consists of a large precinct lined by porticos. It had a rectangular shape and was oriented north-south. The exterior wall was 205 meters long with a propylaea, and the cella stood on a podium in the middle of the enclosure. The Temple of Baal Shaman dates to the late 2nd century BC in its earliest phases. Its altar was built in 115 AD, and it was substantially rebuilt in 131 AD. It consisted of a central cella and two colonnaded courtyards north and south of the central structure. A vestibule consisting of 6 columns preceded the cella, which had its side walls decorated with pilasters in Corinthian order. The Temple of Nabu was largely ruined. The temple was eastern in its plan. The outer enclosures properly led to a 20 by 9 meters podium through portico, of which the bases of the columns survives. The peristyle cell opened onto an outdoor altar. The Temple of Al-Lat is largely ruined, with only a podium, a few columns and the doorframe remaining. Inside the compound, a giant lion relief was excavated, and in its original form was a relief protruding from the temple compound's wall. The ruined Temple of Baal Hammon was located on the top of Jabal al-Muntar hill, which oversees the spring of Efqa. Constructed in 89 AD, it consisted of a cellar and a vestibule with 2 columns. The temple had a defensive tower attached to it. A mosaic depicting the sanctuary was excavated, and it revealed that both the cellar and the vestibule were decorated with merlons. Other buildings. The Great Colonnade was Palmyra's 1.1-kilometre long main street. Most of the columns date to the 2nd century AD, and each is 9.50 meters high. The funerary temple No. 86 is located at the western end of the Great Colonnade. It was built in the 3rd century AD and has a portico of 6 columns and vine patterns carvings. Inside the chamber, steps leads down to a vault crypt. The shrine might have been connected to the royal family, as it is the only tomb inside the city's walls. The tetrapylon was erected during the renovations of Diocletian at the end of the 3rd century. It is a square platform, and each corner contains a grouping of 4 columns. Each column group supports a 150 tons cornice and contains a pedestal in its center that originally carried a statue. Out of 16 columns, only 1 is original, while the rest are from reconstruction work by the Syrian Directorate General of Antiquities in 1963, using concrete. The original columns were brought from Egypt and carved out of pink granite. The city's current walls were erected during the reign of Diocletian, whose fortification of the city enclosed a much smaller area than the original, pre-273 city. The Diocletianic walls had protective towers and fortified gateways. The pre-273 walls were narrow, and while encircling the whole city, they do not seem to have provided real protection against an invasion. No signs of towers or fortified gates exist, and it cannot be proven that the walls enclosed the city, as many gaps appears to have never been defended. The earlier walls seem to have been designed to protect the city against Bedouins and to provide a costume barrier.